She arrived early that morning. She tied her brown hair into a perfect ponytail, adjusted her orange and white uniform, and took a deep breath before pushing open the back door of Hooters. To the other employees, Sarah Miller was just the new waitress, the one who spoke little and observed a lot. But on her very first day, one of the restaurant's most important customers, known for leaving generous tips and making expensive reservations, decided to put her in her place in front of everyone. Inappropriate comments, malicious smiles, accidental touches. What no one knew was that this woman had a past marked by silent achievements, and that behind the waitress's name tag there was much more than an ordinary employee. She endured everything in silence, observed, waited, and when the time came to act, she changed the fate of everyone in that restaurant forever. The morning began like so many others at the Hooters in Beverly Hills. Low background music, the smell of chicken wings and spicy sauce permeating the air, the tables being wiped down for another day of work. Amidst this scene, a new figure moved lightly through the dining room. A woman with dark skin, brushed and shiny black hair, a firm yet calm gaze. She wore the orange and white uniform with dignity, without embarrassment or exhibitionism. Her name was written on her name tag in simple letters, Sarah M. "Are you the new one on the morning shift?" asked the hostess upon seeing her near the bar. "Yes, Sarah. First day," she replied with a polite but restrained smile. No one there knew much about her. The resume submitted to the manager was solid, but unpretentious. Experience in other restaurants, customer service knowledge, English and Spanish courses. But it was her posture that caught the eye. Firm, direct, without anxiety, almost studied. She was assigned to the VIP section, where the most frequent and highest-spending customers had reserved seats, and where the man who would soon become the source of her greatest emotional distress on this journey also held his regular spot, William Caldwell. William was a real estate businessman, tall, always wearing expensive suits and flaunting a Rolex on his wrist. His businesses were successful, and his reputation at the restaurant was that of a good payer with terrible manners. He made no effort to hide his contempt for those who, in his eyes, were there to serve him. Sarah knew who he was. She had heard about him, but chose not to judge prematurely. At their first encounter, he sized her up from head to toe as if examining a new product on display. "New waitress, huh? I hope you know how to smile more than the last one," he said without even greeting her by name. She just nodded. She was used to this kind of reception. Instead of reacting, she observed. The hours passed, and the restaurant grew increasingly crowded. A couple celebrated their wedding anniversary, a group of friends celebrated a promotion, executives held informal business meetings. Sarah didn't stop for a second. She attended to everyone with agility, friendliness, and professionalism. Even the other employees gradually began to notice that there was something different about her. It was as if she already knew the ropes before the instructions were even given, but this bothered William. "Hey, waitress!" he shouted at one point from across the dining room. "We come here to be well served. Where's my bourbon?" Sarah had only taken 2 minutes longer than usual because she was attending to an urgent order from another table. A simple gesture, even correct. But that was enough for William to glare at her as if she had committed a crime. "With all due respect, sir, I'm bringing your order right now." "With all due respect, nothing," he cut her off, speaking loudly enough for everyone to hear. "You haven't even settled in here and you're already playing too busy to serve me." The atmosphere froze for a few seconds. Sarah felt eyes on her. Some colleagues lowered their heads, others just looked away. She took a deep breath, controlling the urge to respond. "Understood, sir," she said firmly, and returned to work. In the following days, William's attitude worsened. Any detail was a reason for humiliation. A slight delay in refilling a drink, the wrong sauce, an order that took 3 minutes longer due to the kitchen, everything was used against her. "If you want to earn decent tips, sweetheart, you'll have to try harder," he even said, smirking as he ran his hand over her hip while asking for the bill. Sarah didn't respond, but every sentence, every touch, every glance was noted in her memory. At one point, an older waitress, Mrs. Patricia Davis, approached her during a break. He doesn't like to be contradicted, especially by women who don't easily bend to his whims. Sarah understood the message. It wasn't about service, it wasn't about efficiency. It was about something deeper, something she had faced before and overcome. But this time, she needed to be strategic. She returned to work with even more focus. She began to note times, words spoken, embarrassing situations, not as someone complaining, but as someone studying a pattern. A week later, during a business lunch, William made a mistake. He spilled red wine on an expensive shirt of a potential investor and blamed Sarah for placing the bottle too close. And once again, he exposed her in front of everyone as if she were responsible. This time, she just looked at him without fear, without anger, but with a firmness that for a moment made the businessman hesitate. Gradually, the other employees began to realize that this new waitress was not just anyone, that behind the silence and patience, there was a strength they had not yet understood. But that was just the beginning, because Sarah wasn't there just to wait tables. She was there to discover the truth, and what was to come would change everything. The dining room was quiet, but one only had to approach the kitchen to be immersed in the constant noise of dishes being prepared, orders being shouted, and hurried footsteps. It was just another ordinary morning at the Hooters in Beverly Hills, and Sarah already knew what to expect. It wasn't just the chaotic flow of customers, it was the pattern. William's sidelong glance as soon as he arrived, the fake smiles from some colleagues, and the whispers that stopped as soon as she approached. She had learned to move with ease, to listen more than she spoke. Every gesture, every tone of voice, every expression on the faces around her, everything was observed, recorded, analyzed. On that particular morning, the tension seemed thicker. A group of executives had reserved the VIP area for an important meeting. It was an occasion that demanded full attention, and the dining room was specially organized. Sarah was the first to arrive to prepare the tables and immediately began the protocol. Impeccable tablecloths, aligned cutlery, sparkling glasses, everything done with precision and calm. The manager accompanying her was impressed with the quality. When William entered the restaurant in his impeccable suit and decisive steps, he looked directly at Sarah. She knew something was coming. "And you've already started organizing on your own. Who authorized that?" he asked in a dry voice. "Yes, sir. Tables arranged according to the standard for corporate meetings. I've already prepared the space, as the reservation indicated, for 15 people. And you consider yourself capable of making decisions without a manager present now?" he retorted, looking around to ensure everyone was paying attention. Sarah was about to respond, but was interrupted by him again. "This isn't some corner diner. This is a high-class establishment. The next time you take action without authorization, you'll answer with your job. Is that clear?" Everyone in the dining room stopped. The manager, who minutes before had praised Sarah's work, lowered his head. She took a deep breath. "Understood, sir." William walked to his table as if nothing had happened, but the damage was done. Once again, he had turned a controlled situation into a spectacle of embarrassment, only this time with the entire restaurant as an audience. In the hallways, the buzz spread. "Did you see what he did to the new girl?" Two attendants whispered in the locker room. "That girl has courage. Just looking at him makes my legs tremble," commented another. Sarah pretended not to hear, but every word was fuel. She didn't need anyone to fight her battles. She would do it herself at the right time. The following week, a new episode further heightened the tension. During a dinner with foreign partners, Sarah noticed that William was clearly intoxicated, drinking too much, and starting to become inappropriate with one of the female guests. She discreetly observed the situation and alerted the manager to keep an eye out. preventing a potential scandal. The incident, which could have been resolved with maturity and a thank you, was transformed by William into another personal attack. "Waitress Sarah, can you explain why you are monitoring my table and my habits?" he asked in the middle of the dining room, loud enough for everyone to hear. "I was just doing my job, sir, ensuring everyone had a good experience," she explained calmly. William smiled, but it was that cynical smile that didn't hide his intention. "I see. So now, besides being a waitress, Missy is also a babysitter. Or are you just trying to impress to get bigger tips?" Sarah didn't answer. An uncomfortable silence filled the room. Several customers were present, including local celebrities. "Because if that's the case, I must remind you that there's a protocol in this establishment, and certain steps require, let's say, proven competence." There was venom in the subtext, and everyone noticed. Later that day, while organizing napkins at the bar, Patricia, that older waitress who already knew the restaurant's ghosts, sat down next to Sarah. "He's testing you, girl. I've seen it happen before, with others, with me." And what did they do? Nothing. Most of them quit before they exploded. Sarah looked out the window, where the California sun was beginning to gild the palm trees on the avenue. Her eyes were firm. "I didn't come this far to run away." Patricia smiled, proud. That same night, upon arriving home, Sarah picked up an old notebook. In it, she made notes of everything: times, words spoken, exchanged glances, and next to each item, a question. What is the pattern? What is the motivation? She wasn't just recording, she was building a map of William's behavior. Meanwhile, the restaurant continued its routine, but a silent change was underway. Sarah was beginning to gain the trust of other professionals. Regular customers asked to be served by her. Her way of treating each person with empathy, listening and calm, won everyone over, except for one, William. He realized that her presence bothered him, not just because she was efficient, but because she was admired. That, for him, was intolerable. And what he didn't yet know was that the woman he was trying to bring down was already far above him. And when the right moment came, she would be the one to decide his fate. Long before she wore the orange and white uniform and walked through the Hooters dining room, Sarah Miller was just a girl in rural America, trying to survive the limitations of a town that didn't always make space for dreams. The daughter of a housekeeper and a construction worker, she grew up in a simple house with two younger brothers. Money was tight, but love and values were abundant. Still young, she learned to help around the house, to care for her brothers, to share the little they had. The difficulties were many, but what her mother always said echoed in her head: be smart, be honest, be better than they expect you to be. At the public school where she studied, Sarah wasn't the most talkative or the most popular, but she was the one who got the best grades, always sitting in the front row with an impeccable notebook, her eyes attentive. She didn't just study to pass. She studied to get out of there. When she was 14, she saw her father suffer a work accident and be mistreated by his boss, who refused to pay for adequate treatment. It was a shock. She remembered the social worker who helped her family get their rights and said firmly, "You deserve justice." That day, something changed inside her. Sarah no longer wanted to be just a victim of circumstances. She wanted to be useful, prepared, present. She wanted to be like that social worker. The following years were a struggle. She worked as a babysitter in the afternoons, studied at night, and even exhausted, she kept her grades high. When she graduated from high school, she got a full scholarship to a university in the state capital. Law, an achievement, a relief, a beginning. But university wasn't easy. Most students came from more privileged backgrounds, imported cars, international trips, free time to study without needing to work. Sarah, on the contrary, did unpaid internships during the day, worked as a waitress at night, and studied in the early hours of the morning. She slept little, ate what she could, and wrote everything down in the same blue notebook she had carried since high school. She was discredited by some professors, ignored by classmates, but she also found people who believed in her. Her civil law professor, Dr. Peterson, saw a rare dedication in Sarah. "You have a critical eye, an instinct for justice. Don't lose that," he once said. Sarah didn't lose it. She graduated with honors, submitting her final paper on harassment and psychological violence in the workplace, based on her own experiences and observations. After graduation, she worked in small firms, serving people who couldn't afford much. She saw firsthand what the legal system often ignores: inequality in access to justice, disregard for the most vulnerable, the coldness of some judgments. It was there, among long queues and cramped courthouse rooms, that she developed not only technical expertise, but also deep empathy. Sarah always said it wasn't the diploma that made someone important. It was how they looked at others, listened, and respected them. In one of these cases, she met a 35-year-old woman, a victim of constant harassment in the workplace. Her boss, the owner of a medium-sized company, seemed untouchable. Sarah took on the case, gathered evidence, and even when other lawyers gave up, she persisted. The judge's assistant once commented, "You don't just seem like a lawyer, you seem like someone born to lead." Sarah smiled, as she always kept compliments with the same discretion with which she hid her dreams. It was during these years that she realized, to change the system, she would have to go further. Have knowledge, yes, but also decision-making power. And that would only come with study, much more study, but no one around her knew what she was planning. Her routine was the same as always: a simple suit, a briefcase in hand, convincing arguments. But at night, when the cases were over, she would sit in front of the computer she bought on installments and study as if her life depended on it. Because it did. Every step she climbed was steeped in silence. She didn't announce her moves, didn't publicize her victories, just kept going, and each day she got closer to something bigger. One day, her mother, already aged with gray hair and tired eyes, looked at her and said, "You've changed, daughter, but your heart is still the same." Sarah held her mother's hand and replied, "I'm just trying to get to where they never let us in." Over time, opportunities arose, invitations, scholarships, proposals, but all of this remained out of reach for her colleagues at Hooters. There, she was just the new waitress, quiet and determined. And that's exactly how she wanted it to remain for now, because the Sarah they thought they knew was just the tip of the iceberg. And what was behind it? No one there was prepared to find out. The days at Hooters in Beverly Hills followed with the almost military precision that only large establishments can maintain. Tight shifts, high targets, mandatory smiles. But for Sarah, time wasn't just marked by clocks and order slips. It was marked by behaviors. Every glance, every awkward silence, every phrase uttered in a mocking tone were pieces of a puzzle that was beginning to form before her eyes. She had already learned to identify patterns, and at Hooters, one pattern stood out: fear. People didn't speak openly, but they spoke with their eyes. As soon as William entered the restaurant, smiles became tense. Conversations dropped in volume. It was as if the entire establishment held its breath when he passed. Sarah, discreet as always, began to approach less prominent sections. In the cashier area, an attendant named Jessica brought up the subject during a break. "You're strong, you know," she said, looking sideways before continuing, "to put up with what he's been doing since day one." Sarah just smiled faintly. "I tend to listen more than I speak, Jessica." The other laughed but didn't seem at ease. "That's good, because around here, those who talk too much don't last." Sarah then asked her first direct question: "Has he treated other waitresses badly?" Jessica took a while to answer. It was clear that choosing her words carefully was almost an automatic reflex. "Yes, many, especially those he thinks don't fit the profile he likes. He has a type. she added in a dry tone. In the following days, Sarah gathered stories without pressing, without seeming too interested, just leaving space for people to talk. A receptionist recounted that a young Latina waitress cried in the bathroom after being ridiculed by William in front of his friends. He said her English was incomprehensible. She quit the following week. A bartender reported being called too slow in front of other customers for taking 30 seconds to serve a drink. The real reason? She refused to give him her phone number. A junior manager recalled when an older employee was targeted with comments about her shelf life expiring. William allegedly said, "This place needs young faces, not family mothers." None of this was in reports. No one formalized complaints. It was all whispered, hidden, and real. Sarah realized that the restaurant's culture revolved around silence, a silence fueled by William's money, his generous tips, and above all, his connections with the owners. After all, he brought results: high spending, influential friends, constant presence at events that gave visibility to the establishment. He was an important client for Hooters' image, and that kind of image was protected at all costs. But Sarah knew not all that glitters is gold. On a night shift, she gained access to an informal log of complaints that showed serious inconsistencies. A customer had reported William's inappropriate behavior towards a waitress, but the official report only stated misunderstanding resolved. When she discreetly questioned the team about the incident, she received only shrugged shoulders and vague phrases. "It's better not to mess with that, Sarah. You're new here," said a more experienced bartender. That wasn't just any fear, it was institutionalized fear. Still, she continued to pay attention. At another time, during a shift change, she overheard two waitresses commenting on a colleague who had been fired after confronting William about an inappropriate touch. She said she was going to sue, but we never saw her again. They say she received a settlement to keep quiet, one of the employees recounted. Sarah asked if this was reported. It was, but so far nothing, no response. The pattern was clear. William used his power not only to humiliate but also to silence, and most disturbingly, he had backing for it. One quiet afternoon, while organizing old menus in a remote cabinet, Sarah found a misfiled envelope. It was a letter from a former manager, dated a year earlier, sent to the Human Resources Department. In it, the professional described in detail episodes of harassment, embarrassment, and inappropriate behavior by William towards female employees. The HR response was attached. It was a short, formal letter, closing the case due to lack of concrete evidence and conflicting reports. The manager was transferred to another unit in the chain. Sarah kept a copy in her personal folder. With each new piece of evidence, it became clearer. William was not an isolated problem. He was a reflection of a system that preferred to maintain profits rather than protect its female employees. But now, there was someone paying attention, someone who not only listened but also documented. And unlike the others, Sarah wasn't there just for a salary. She had a goal, and that goal was getting closer. Behind the scenes of the restaurant, a silent movement was beginning to form, and when it came to light, no one would escape unscathed. By this point, any ordinary person would have already exploded, would have shouted back, quit, or filed a formal complaint, even knowing it would likely be ignored. But Sarah was not just anyone, and whoever thought her silence was synonymous with weakness was making the most common mistake when faced with her: underestimation. She had faced far greater challenges than the inflated ego of a wealthy customer, and she had learned, still young, that certain battles aren't won by shouting, they're won with strategy. After weeks of accumulating information, she realized she was surrounded by a system that protected the most powerful and penalized those who dared to react. So she decided to do what she did best: observe and plan. The plan wasn't born ready-made. It came in pieces, a report here, a coincidence there. She was connecting dots that to any other employee seemed like isolated cases. She started arriving earlier. She went straight to the manager's office where she helped Rosa, the administrative secretary who complained of being overworked. While they organized old reports and orders, Sarah listened and took notes. Many stories buried in the restaurant's paperwork revealed dangerous patterns. Waitresses transferred without explanation, complaints that mysteriously disappeared from the system, confidential settlements. Sometimes it seems like certain information just vanishes, Rosa commented casually. Sarah just smiled. In the customer service department, she made a point of observing different shifts. She watched how William treated male bartenders and how he treated women, how he spoke to white customers, and how he addressed Latina or black female employees. He never used overtly offensive words, but the tone, the mockery, the contempt, disguised as demand, it was all there, implicit, disguised, but real. Sarah wrote everything down in her old blue notebook, but they weren't just notes. She made cross-references, linked names, dates, areas, behaviors, using her analytical intelligence built over the years to assemble a silent dossier. She knew she could only act when she had irrefutable proof, and when she did act, it would be definitively. On a certain night shift, she saw a young manager named Amanda being interrupted 3 times by William during a conversation about the bill. Every time she tried to explain something, he made a point of demeaning her. "How long have you been here exactly?" "Better call someone who understands numbers," he said in front of everyone. Sarah watched Amanda swallow her response and continue as if nothing had happened. Later, Sarah found her in the break area. "Does he do this to everyone?" Sarah asked, pouring coffee. "Only to those who don't give in," Amanda replied with a bitter laugh. "With the men, he's just demanding. With us, it's humiliating." Sarah made eye contact for a second longer than usual. "Do you have proof of this?" Amanda hesitated, then shook her head. "No, but if you do, let me know. I'll give my testimony." From that day on, Sarah began to discreetly record some of the most critical encounters with William. Not with the intention of exposing him needlessly, but to protect herself and the others. She recorded audio with her phone in her pocket, registered emails with copies, saved documents in encrypted folders on her laptop. One night, she saw William humiliate a new waitress who had spilled a drink. Instead of discretion, he made a point of drawing everyone's attention, referring to her as incompetent and demanding she be fired on the spot. Sarah discreetly noted the time, the waitress's name, the employees who were present. Later, she entered the internal system and recorded the episode with a neutral but clear description. This was one of Sarah's distinguishing features. She didn't exaggerate, didn't dramatize, just reported the facts with surgical precision. Meanwhile, she pretended to be just another employee. On her shift, she maintained her composure, smiled at customers, delivered all orders on time, didn't complain about anything. She was praised by some, ignored by others, feared by William, even if he didn't yet know exactly why. And it was in this calm that she began to make allies. Older waitresses started seeking her out to vent. Junior managers asked her for discreet advice. Newcomers came to thank her for defending their correct actions when William tried to place blame where there was no error. Sarah didn't seek allies, but she attracted them naturally, because where others saw someone quiet, she was trustworthy and firm. One Saturday afternoon, while reviewing her section before the evening rush, the general manager passed by her and commented, "You've been doing excellent work, miss, and they say you have a good sense for complex situations." Sarah responded with a gentle smile. "Sometimes you just need to pay attention to what no one wants to see." It was the first time someone from the restaurant's management realized that Sarah wasn't just an efficient waitress. She was something more, but they still didn't know what. Sarah knew she was approaching the right moment, but she was in no hurry. She didn't want empty revenge. She wanted justice with a foundation, with strength, with evidence. And for that, she needed to wait, listen, observe, because when she decided to act, no one would be able to ignore her anymore. It was a Friday afternoon, one of those days when the restaurant seemed more like an arena than an eatery. The dining room was packed. There were customers waiting at the entrance, waitresses rushing from one side to the other, and managers being called simultaneously by 4 different groups. Sarah arrived early, as always. Impeccable uniform, blue notebook in her bag, upright posture. Little did she know that this day would go down in the history of the restaurant and her own life. The activity revolved around an important event. A group of investors, led by William, was celebrating the closing of a multi-million-dollar deal. It was a VIP table, reserved in advance, filled with executives, the kind of occasion that demanded special attention. William was leading the celebration, and the moment he saw Sarah in the dining room, his gaze hardened. "Waitress Miller, you will not be serving this table. We need experienced professionals here," he said bluntly. She responded with a "yes, sir," and positioned herself to help in other sections, organizing orders and supporting colleagues. But minutes later, an unexpected situation occurred. One of the waitresses assigned to the VIP table was subjected to an extremely inappropriate comment by William, who, clearly intoxicated, made an indecent proposal aloud, causing general embarrassment. The young woman, visibly shaken, quickly moved away. Sarah noticed before the others, ran to the hallway, and found her colleague crying. She quickly calmed her, advised her to report the incident, and returned to cover the section, as customers were still waiting to be served. William entered the hallway at that moment and saw only Sarah near the reserved area, organizing a tray of drinks. "What do you think you're doing?" he shouted. "I've been waiting for 5 minutes." Everyone stopped. Time seemed to freeze. "Sir, I'm just covering the table while—" "You're a waitress, not a manager," he interrupted, his voice raised and laden with contempt. "This was irresponsible. You made my guest leave crying." Sarah tried to explain, but he gave her no room. "This woman has just ruined my celebration. I demand that management take immediate action," he bellowed in front of at least 10 people. The silence that followed was awkward. The general manager, visibly uncomfortable, entered the hallway shortly after. Sarah was called for a formal conversation. She wasn't fired, but she was suspended for 3 days until the case was evaluated. 3 days. 3 days of injustice for helping a colleague. 3 days away from a restaurant she knew like no one else, but which pretended not to see who she truly was. As she left the building that day, Sarah walked to the bus stop without rushing. She was serene on the outside, but inside she was burning. It wasn't the first time she had been punished for doing the right thing, but it would be the last. During those 3 days off, she didn't rest. She finalized the report she was writing, organized the recordings, printed documents showing a series of manipulated incidents, separated accounts from other employees, some named, others anonymous. She created a 60-page dossier, detailed, irrefutable, and while doing all this, she remembered her mother. She remembered when, still a teenager, she heard, "Daughter, when they don't let you in through the door, learn to build your own." Sarah not only built a door, she was about to open up the whole building. On the morning of her return to the restaurant, she put on her uniform as always, but there was something in her eyes, something different, a firm glint, a sharper silence. William saw her arrive in the dining room and let out a slight smirk, as if he had already won. But this time Sarah didn't look away. She walked past him slowly, as if counting down the final seconds before the end. The restaurant didn't know it yet, but it was about to witness the beginning of the fall of its most untouchable customer, and with him, an entire system that for years had ignored the suffering of those who sustained that structure. silent, humiliated, replaced. But Sarah would not be just another one. She had waited, listened, observed. Now it was time to speak, and when she spoke, no one would be able to silence her again. 3 days. That was the length of the suspension, but for Sarah they were 3 days of construction, focus, preparation, decision. When she returned to Hooters on a sunny Monday morning, something was visibly different. Not in her uniform, still orange and white, simple, unadorned, nor in her tone of voice, which remained calm. The change was in her eyes. It was the kind of change that isn't explained, it's felt. The moment she walked through the back door, where there usually wasn't much movement, the security guard who always ignored her looked directly at her and just said, "Welcome back." She thanked him with a subtle nod and continued down the hallway. It was as if, suddenly, her presence carried weight, as if everyone there instinctively sensed that something was about to happen, but still without knowing what. The restaurant's routine continued at the same pace. Customers arrived, orders were served, checks were closed constantly, but as soon as Sarah entered the locker room, the whispers ceased. She greeted everyone with the same politeness as always, picked up her apron, and went straight to the dining room. William, upon seeing her, smiled ironically. "I thought you'd already found a place more suited to your profile," he said, without even looking directly at her. Sarah responded for the first time in a firm tone. "I was too polite, sir, and that ended up confusing some people." He paused for a moment, surprised. She had never responded like that, but Sarah didn't wait for a reply. She walked to the administrative office and formally requested a meeting with the regional director of the Hooters chain. She signed the request with her blue pen, using a firm, clear, direct handwriting. The form was handed over to the responsible department, and the rumor spread quickly. She requested a meeting with the regional director. Is she really going to confront William? She has nothing to lose. Sarah said nothing, just observed. In the main hallway, she met the waitress who had been humiliated the previous week, the same one who cried in the hallway. She hugged Sarah discreetly. "You're not alone," Sarah smiled. "I never was." During lunch, she sat alone in the break room as she always did. But this time she didn't go unnoticed. A group of female employees came to her one by one to greet her. No one spoke directly about the case, but in each of their eyes there was a kind of silent recognition. Later, while organizing her section before happy hour, she was called by the general manager, the same one who had suspended her days before. "Waitress Miller, may I speak with you for a minute?" They went to the office. The manager looked at her with a mixture of curiosity and caution. "We received your request. Do you really want to take this further?" Sarah didn't hesitate. "I do. I have documentation, witnesses, and a history that needs to be heard." The man nodded slowly. "If you have proof, you will be heard." She handed him an envelope. Inside were the first documents of her dossier. That same night, William began to feel the pressure. During dinner, he made an inappropriate comment about one of the waitresses. But this time, the hostess accompanying him intervened. "Sir, I believe that kind of comment is not appropriate. The employee is just doing her job." William fell silent. Something was changing. People were less willing to obey without question, and this bothered him deeply. The next morning, upon arriving at the restaurant, the general manager found a memo from the regional directorate, a summons for a preliminary hearing with the corporation's ethics committee, date set, mandatory attendance. He closed the document with concern, not knowing how that waitress had managed to go so far. But Sarah knew. She had waited, tolerated, listened, and now she acted with method, with support, with truth. And while the restaurant was still trying to understand what was happening, she was organizing the final details, because the next meeting wouldn't just be a formal conversation. It would be the beginning of the fall of an empire built on harassment, arrogance, and silence. And Sarah didn't just want justice. She wanted to show that no one there would ever be treated as invisible again. It was an ordinary morning at the Hooters in Beverly Hills, at least for those who didn't know what was about to happen. The conference room of the neighboring hotel was formally arranged. A long table, upholstered chairs, a pitcher of water, stacked folders with documents, and a projector connected, awaiting the presentation. In the corner of the room, an assistant from the legal department updated records. In the center, members of the corporation's ethics committee, 2 regional directors, an external HR consultant, and a lawyer specializing in labor law. To the left of the table, William Caldwell arrived with firm steps, as if he believed he was there by mistake. The general manager of Hooters accompanied him, visibly uncomfortable. "I still think this is all absurd," William said, adjusting his watch. "My relationship with the restaurant speaks for itself." The committee representative responded coldly. "That is precisely why we are here. The facts need to be evaluated, regardless of anyone's history." William forced a smile, crossed his arms, and sat down confidently. On the other side of the table, Sarah entered in silence. She was wearing formal attire, a dark blue blazer, dress pants, her hair tied back, a serene expression, but her eyes said everything. She carried a black folder and a tablet. There was no fear, only certainty. She sat down, greeted those present with a slight nod, and waited. "Miss Sarah Miller, the floor is yours," announced the committee chairman. Sarah stood up, took a deep breath. "Thank you. I know many here know me as a simple waitress. And that's exactly how I wanted to be seen from day one, because only then could I see what really happens behind the scenes of this establishment," she said, opening the folder. She began distributing copies of documents, reports, transcripts, recorded audio, filed complaints, names of female employees who had resigned after episodes of harassment. The room fell into absolute silence. For 3 months I recorded everything, not because I wanted revenge, but because I saw what fear does to people. I saw brilliant professionals being silenced, humiliated, replaced, or ignored. She then tapped the tablet. An audio recording played, William's arrogant voice speaking to a waitress. "If you can't even serve properly, imagine what you'd do in my bed." Another click, another audio. "I don't care if you felt disrespected. If you came in here wearing that uniform, you deal with the consequences." William fidgeted in his chair. "This is illegal. You had no authorization to record anything," he said, agitated. Sarah looked at him directly for the first time. "No, sir. But do you know what else is illegal? Sexual harassment in the workplace, abusive behavior, creating a hostile environment for female employees. And you did all of that." The committee remained silent. The impact was visible. Sarah then took the final step. "And since everyone here values formality and history so much, I think it's time to tell the truth." She pulled an envelope with an official letterhead from her folder and handed it to the committee chairwoman. "My name is Sarah Becerra Miller, lawyer, graduate of UCLA School of Law, with a master's in labor law from Stanford, specializing in harassment and discrimination in the workplace. And since January of this year, by appointment from the central office, I am the new legal director for the Hooters chain on the West Coast." The room froze. William's eyes widened. He tried to speak, but nothing came out. Sarah continued. "I went undercover, because the complaints we received indicated something deep-seated, a culture of veiled harassment, abuse of power, and systematic silencing. I needed to see it with my own eyes, and I did." She turned to William. "And I saw you especially. Your way of treating female employees, your inappropriate comments, your lack of respect for those you consider inferior, the fear you spread in the hallways. The fear that kept this restaurant sick from the inside. William stood up, red with anger. This is a setup. I've been a patron of this establishment for over 10 years. Precisely. 10 years of harassment, of complicity, of arrogance. But today, it ends. Sarah turned to the committee. I have submitted all evidence to the legal department. Lawsuits will be filed, victims will be heard, and the restaurant will finally be a place of dignity. She turned back to William. And as for you, Mr. Caldwell, you are officially banned from all Hooters locations, effective immediately, and the company will support any employee who wishes to file formal criminal charges against you. He was speechless. His eyes, once so haughty, now searched for an escape. There was none. He picked up his coat without a word and left the room under the watchful eyes of everyone present. No one applauded, no one shouted, because justice, when it is true, silences and liberates. Sarah sat down calmly. The committee chairwoman spoke with a firm voice. Thank you, Dr. Miller. The company is in good hands. And at that moment, it became clear. The quiet waitress many had ignored was the most powerful woman in that room. And what would she do from then on? She would change the history of the Hooters chain forever. In the restaurant's hallways, the silence was different. It was no longer the silence of fear. It was the silence of change. The news of William Caldwell's ban spread like wildfire. Female employees from all departments commented, but with a look that mixed surprise, relief, and hope. For the first time in a long time, someone with power had taken real action. Sarah, now publicly recognized as Dr. Sarah Becerra Miller, lawyer, specialist, and legal director, continued to walk through the restaurant dining rooms as she always had, with firm steps, a calm voice, and attentive eyes. But now there was a visible respect around her. In the days following the ban, the chain underwent an accelerated restructuring. Sarah's first act as legal director was to create an internal listening committee composed of female employees from all levels: waitresses, hostesses, bartenders, cooks, managers, and administrative staff. The goal: to hear stories, open space for complaints, ensure no one else was silenced. In here, no voice is too small to be heard, she said at the first meeting with the new committee. And whoever uses power to humiliate will be held accountable. Behind the scenes, administrative proceedings began. Archived cases were revisited. Former employees were contacted to report what they had experienced. Some cried on the phone, unable to believe that someone finally cared. In practice, the change was also visible. Sarah reorganized service protocols so that no female employee would be vulnerable to harassment. She installed cameras in strategic areas, not to monitor employees, but to protect them. She reopened positions for professionals who had resigned due to toxic environments. And most symbolically, she created a direct, anonymous channel for harassment complaints, available 24 hours. This restaurant does not protect harassers, she said, signing the directive. But the transformation went beyond the walls of Hooters. Sarah was invited for interviews on news channels, without sensationalism, without vanity, just to tell her strategy. She spoke about the importance of leaders getting closer to the grassroots, about how direct experience with the reality of the environment is fundamental for ethical management. You don't fight harassment from the top down, you fight it from the inside out, she would say. In one of the interviews, she was asked, "What motivated you to go undercover as a waitress?" Sarah took a deep breath and replied, "Because I've been there. I've been the professional who wasn't heard. I've been ignored, judged by my last name, by my tone of voice, by my origin. I needed to feel again the weight that so many carry in silence, and I needed to show that this weight is not normal nor acceptable." On social media, her story went viral, not as a scandal but as an example. Women from all over the country commented, This lawyer represents all of us who have ever been silenced. Sarah is proof that right still wins. This story made me cry and believe again. Inside the restaurant, the changes continued. Sarah created a scholarship program called Wings to Fly, aimed at female employees who wished to pursue college or postgraduate studies. The project offered financial support, academic guidance, and above all, respect. The first beneficiary of the program was Jessica, the same attendant who months earlier had warned Sarah about William's abuses. "I never thought I could be a lawyer, Dr. Miller. I always thought that world wasn't for me." Sarah responded with a firm smile. "Now it is, and you'll walk in through the front door." The management team began to be trained in harassment prevention and equity. Workshops were created to teach about labor rights and how to identify abusive behaviors. The atmosphere changed, not overnight, but it changed. One day, Sarah passed by the same hallway where she had first been humiliated by William. She stopped, looked around, breathed. On the wall there was now a small poster with the words, "To respect is to protect, to listen is to value, to act is to transform. Dr. Sarah B. Miller." She hadn't asked for it to be put there, but someone had. And that was all she needed to know. The message was being understood. William, for his part, had disappeared from the news. He no longer frequented his usual places, didn't appear at events. He had lost what he valued most, the feeling of impunity. Sarah didn't seek revenge, she sought correction, and now she was finally in the place where she could do it. Not as a distant figure of power, but as someone who knew the restaurant floor, the pains of double shifts, the weight of invisibility. She returned to the base, climbed without rushing, and when she reached the top, she brought everyone with her. The lights of Hooters in Beverly Hills never go out, but since Sarah Miller took the lead, they began to illuminate more than just menus. They began to reveal stories, faces, voices. The restaurant, once known for its flashy uniforms and sometimes awkward atmosphere, became an example of a respectful work environment. Efficiency was not sacrificed. On the contrary, it increased, because when people feel respected, they work with more dedication. When they are heard, they commit. When they are seen, they flourish. Sarah came to be called Dr. Miller in all corporate meetings, but she still preferred that the female employees just call her Sarah. Whenever she could, she visited different units, talked with the waitresses, listened to their stories, answered questions, advised on rights. She never forgot where she came from, and she made sure others never forgot either. One morning, at a public university in California, the same one where she studied when she was young, Sarah was invited to give a lecture. The auditorium was packed with students, professors, and curious professionals. She stepped onto the small stage and took a deep breath before starting. "When I was your age, I spent more time working to pay for college than studying. I lacked money, time, support, but I had one thing no one could take from me, the will to change my destiny, and later the destiny of other people too." She told her story with simplicity. She didn't omit the pain, but she also didn't play the victim. She spoke of difficult choices, sleepless nights, the no's she heard, the disdainful looks, the closed doors, and how she built her own. At the end of the lecture, a young woman stood up and asked, "Dr. Miller, do you regret having posed as a waitress?" Sarah smiled, moved. "Not at all. In fact, that was the moment I felt most like a real lawyer, because it was there that I saw with my own eyes what really needed to be defended." The audience gave her a standing ovation. Today, the Wings to Fly program has already helped dozens of female employees complete technical and higher education courses. The Hooters chain serves as a model for other companies in the restaurant sector. And Sarah's story continues to be told as an inspiration in universities, corporations, and leadership training programs. But for her, the greatest recognition doesn't come from headlines. It comes from transformed work environments. Like that afternoon when a new shy waitress found her in the break room and said, "Doctor, thank you. Now we work here without fear." Sarah looked at her and replied, "Not now, always. It just needed someone to remember." She turned her back, walked through the dining room and stopped at the entrance. There, two young female managers were training a new group of employees on respect in the workplace. The scene made her smile. Yes, the world doesn't change with a single decision, but it begins to change when someone has the courage to take the first step. Sarah took that step, and in doing so, she paved the way for thousands. And you? Have you ever felt invisible in a place where you just wanted to be respected? Share your story in the comments. And if this story touched you, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next ones. Here, every story is a reminder that justice may take time, but when it arrives, it transforms everything.